Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. When I took my family to camp on the land my uncle left me, I thought I was returning to peace. Instead, I stepped into a silent war where fake maps, forged letters, and buried secrets turned a quiet forest into a battleground. And the HOA president? She made one fatal mistake. She picked the wrong man. I had not been back to my uncle's land since the funeral, and even then I barely looked around. The grief made everything feel blurry and distant, as if the property were wrapped in fog. But that morning, driving the long gravel road with my wife in the passenger seat and my kids arguing in the back, the place felt startlingly vivid. Every curve of the pines, every bend of the river, every glint of sunlight off the wet stones felt like it had been waiting for me to return. When we reached the old clearing near the river's horseshoe bend, something in my chest loosened. The air smelled of wet earth and sweet gum sap, the same scent that clung to my uncle's jackets. The clearing still held the stone fire ring he'd built decades ago, flat granite rocks arranged in a near-perfect circle. My son ran to it immediately, poking the ash with a stick and announcing it vintage. My daughter declared the entire place a fairy forest, which, given the way the morning light filtered through the hickories, was not entirely inaccurate. My wife laughed, already unpacking the cooler, her hair pulled back with that faded bandana she only wore on camping trips. For the first hour, everything felt easy. The kids fished in the shallows, shrieking every time a minnow flashed near their toes. My wife sorted through our mess of camping gear while I walked the perimeter of the clearing, reacquainting myself with the place I'd inherited. 1,000 acres of wild land, bordered by the river on one side and steep forest ridges on the other. My uncle had kept it untouched, refusing to carve it up or sell it off. He left it to me with a single line in his will: keep the land honest. I intended to do exactly that. I was kneeling near a fallen pine, checking where a game trail cut through the brush, when I heard the rumble of an engine, an entitled "too clean" engine, the kind that idles loudly to remind you it cost more than it should have. I straightened up, brushing needles from my jeans. A white SUV rolled toward us across the uneven ground, its tires crunching twigs and gravel as if the driver had zero respect for suspension systems or common sense. A gold and blue logo gleamed on the door. Riverbend Falls Estates Homeowners Association. My first thought was, they must be lost. My second was, no one speeds like that when they're lost. The SUV stopped with a self-important hiss of brakes. The driver doors swung open, and out stepped a woman in a crisp blouse, hiking boots too clean to have met dirt before today, and sunglasses that probably cost more than my truck's last repair. She didn't smile. She didn't even blink in our direction, as though eye contact were beneath her pay grade. Behind her climbed out a man I can only describe as a hobby cop. Khaki shirt, phony badge, utility belt with nothing in it, and the kind of posture that screamed, "I rehearse arrests in my bathroom mirror." "Excuse me," the woman said, in a tone that suggested she meant the opposite. "This area is private property belonging to Riverbend Falls Estates. Camping is not permitted. Open flames are strictly prohibited. You'll need to vacate immediately." I wiped my hands on my pants and walked toward her, forcing a polite smile. "Afternoon. Actually, this is my land. I inherited all of this last year. We're just here for the weekend." That was the moment her expression cracked. Not much, just a twitch, like someone briefly unplugged the power from her sense of superiority. "I'm Karen Joel," she said, lifting her chin, "president of Riverbend Falls HOA. According to our boundaries, this riverside area is part of the community's protected green space." "Protected from whom?" I asked. "Migrating campers." She didn't appreciate that. "Show me proof you own this area." "Gladly." I went to my pack, pulled out the envelope I'd brought partly out of nostalgia and partly because I know my uncle's history with unpredictable neighbors. Inside were the notarized inheritance documents, a printed cadastral map with GPS coordinates, and the official transfer papers from the county registrar. I handed them to her. She didn't take them. She snatched them the way a toddler grabs someone else's toy. While she scanned the papers, her security officer puffed up his chest and stared at me with the intensity of a man who badly wanted someone to commit a misdemeanor. The moment Karen finished reading, her mouth tightened into a single white line. "These could easily be forged." "Sure," I said mildly, "because forging multiple county-sealed documents is a fun weekend hobby of mine." "I'm calling the police," she announced, stepping back as if she expected me to lunge at her. Officer Whitfield will know what to do. I shrugged. Call whoever you need. My wife came up beside me. Is everything okay? Oh, just a jurisdictional delusion, I said quietly. She snorted, which made Karen glare at her like she'd thrown a rock. It took about 10 minutes for the patrol cruiser to snake down the gravel road toward us. Officer Reed stepped out. I recognized him from a wildfire management project I'd worked on years ago. A good man, calm, straightforward. Karen practically sprinted toward him. Officer, thank goodness, she said breathlessly. This man is illegally occupying HOA land, lighting fires without a permit, endangering residents. Reed held up a hand. Ma'am, slow down. What land? This riverfront. She gestured broadly, as though she personally owned the water. He's trespassing and presenting falsified documents. Reed looked at me. Nolan, everything all right? Fine, I said, handing him the paperwork. He studied it, then pulled up the parcel map on his dashboard computer, keyed in the coordinates, and nodded slowly. These documents check out. This entire riverside area, along with the surrounding forest, belongs to Mr. Savage. Has for less than a year. Karen blinked rapidly, like a robot trying to reboot. That's impossible. Our community map shows. Your community map, Reed said gently, is not the county's map. The hobby cop took a step back, suddenly fascinated by his shoes. Reed returned my documents. You're good here. Sorry for the interruption. I waved it off. Not your fault. Karen recovered just enough to hiss, this is far from over. She climbed back into her SUV, slammed the door, and tore off across the uneven ground, which I hoped at least knocked something loose under her chassis. As her taillights vanished into the trees, my son looked up at me. Dad, who was that lady? Someone who thinks rules are a personal accessory, I said. Don't worry about her. But even as I said it, a tightness settled across my shoulders. People like Karen rarely meant what they said, except when they said, this isn't over, then they always meant it. A week after our camping trip, I returned to the property alone. No tents this time, no fishing rods or marshmallows, just a clipboard, a GPS unit, and my old Nikon. The weather had turned grayer, colder, and I had a gut feeling I couldn't shake, like something was off, some part of the air no longer mine. Maybe it was Karen's final words ringing in my head. Maybe it was instinct. Either way, I wasn't coming to relax. The road was exactly as we left it, until it wasn't. About 50 yards from the old access path that cuts through the south end of the property, I noticed something strange. Gravel, not mud, not pine needles. Clean, fresh, white gravel, laid like a trail across the forest floor. My tires crunched over it as I slowed, pulling the truck to a stop. And then I saw it. A gate. Not a rustic hand-built barrier like the one my uncle once had to keep deer out of his garden. No, this was a regulation aluminum arm barrier with a padlock and an official-looking sign screwed into it. HOA vehicles only. Trespassers will be reported. I blinked. Then I laughed. Then I got out of the truck and took a dozen photos from every angle, making sure to get GPS readings in frame. I circled around, and that's when I noticed more signs, fresh, laminated ones nailed directly into the bark of several trees. Private property. Riverbend Falls Ho. No entry. One had already started to bend where the bark was swelling against it. They'd staked their claim. Problem was, it wasn't theirs. I kept walking down toward the riverbend, heart pounding harder with every step. As I got closer to the old campsite, a pit formed in my stomach. The stone fire ring, my uncle's, the one we'd used the weekend before, was gone. Not dismantled. Gone. The stones had been hauled away, the earth disturbed, and in the center was a half-assed attempt to cover it all with dirt and pine needles. But someone had also left behind the corner of a contractor's trash bag, half buried under debris. They tried to erase it. I took more photos, dropped to one knee, brushed the soil aside until the black plastic glinted clearly in the lens. The petty calculated malice of it boiled my blood, not just erasing a campsite, but trying to turn history into trash, trying to send a message. Not yours. Problem was, again, it was mine. By the time I got back to the truck, my jaw was tight enough to crack teeth. I called the sheriff's department and asked to file a report for illegal structures and signage placed on private property. The dispatcher connected me with Deputy Wallace, who promised to meet me on site in an hour. While I waited, I sent the photos and GPS data to my attorney. Well, my new attorney, a real estate specialist I'd retained 3 days after the incident with Karen. He was already sniffing around the HOA's filings and history. So far, he hadn't liked what he'd found. Wallace arrived in a patrol SUV, a younger guy with that polite but tired look that said he'd seen too much suburban drama for one lifetime. "You weren't kidding," he said, looking over the gate. "Nope," I said. "Want to see the signs they nailed into living trees?" He winced. "Please tell me it's not more of those laminated HOA plaques." "Oh, it is," I said. "They've got branding and everything." We walked the perimeter together, and I showed him the tampered fire pit. He took it all seriously, photographed everything with his department-issued tablet, and recorded coordinates. I gave him copies of the ownership documents and parcel map. He looked them over carefully, nodded, and radioed in the incident. "Do you know who put these up?" he asked. "I have a strong suspicion. A woman named Karen Joel, president of Riverbend Falls HOA. She was here last week. Claimed this area was part of their green space. Called the cops on me." Wallace raised an eyebrow. "Did she now?" And the responding officer confirmed the land is mine. Official documents, maps, everything. She saw it too. He let out a slow whistle and scribbled a note. "All right, here's how we'll handle it. I'm going to log this as a formal report of unauthorized installation of private infrastructure, specifically a gate and posted signage on a confirmed parcel of private land. I'll list Riverbend Falls HOA as a possible respondent. They'll be contacted and asked to explain who authorized this. You're well within your rights to remove the signs and the gate, but I'd suggest waiting until we notify them officially. Less drama, more leverage." "Fine by me," I said. Wallace looked around one last time and then gestured toward the gravel. "This is new, delivered in the last few days for sure. Whoever did this wanted vehicles coming in, possibly construction. You expecting anyone?" "Nope, and I didn't authorize anyone to set foot here." "Then I'd say they're getting bolder." After he left, I stood alone beside the gate, staring through the bars at my own trees, my own land. I didn't need to be told this wasn't just about Karen being petty anymore. This was strategy. Someone was escalating, and they'd made a mistake. They thought I was just a guy with a tent. What they didn't know, what Karen never asked, is that I used to work with the Forest Service as a surveyor, that I know how to document damage, verify coordinates, and file federal land encroachment complaints that get bumped up the chain real fast. So I went back to the truck, pulled out my camera again, and got to work like I was filing a federal dam report, because by the end of this, I might be. A few days after the incident with the gate, my lawyer, Brian Cortez, called me just after lunch with that particular clipped tone he used when someone in a meeting had just said something profoundly stupid. "They're trying to claim the river," he said. I nearly choked on my coffee. "Excuse me. HOA meeting last night. Public minutes." Karen Joel presented what she called historical community stewardship documentation to the board and attending members. Claimed the HOA has been maintaining the riverbank and trail system for over 15 years and thus has a legal interest in managing access. I sat very still at my desk, staring at the topo map spread out in front of me. Managing access to my land. Essentially, yes, she's using it as a foundation to pursue a prescriptive easement, or more likely, a conservation servitude. She floated the idea that the HOA might request the county recognize their right-of-use status and begin formal annexation of the river frontage. She's trying to steal it legally. Using paperwork instead of padlocks, yeah. That night, I barely slept. My mind kept circling the phrase, managing access. There was nothing accidental about any of this. Karen hadn't just taken offense to our little camping trip. She was executing a plan and had probably been doing so long before I ever set foot back on the land. By morning, I had a strategy of my own. I drove into town and requested the last 15 years of public land use data from the county clerk's office. It took half the day and a good-natured bribe of 3 Starbucks gift cards to get what I needed. What I found was both infuriating and vindicating. Not a single permit, easement, or service request had ever been filed by Riverbend Falls HOA for my parcel or the adjacent Riverbend. Not one. The county had no records of trail maintenance, utilities, or conservation activity under their name in that region. What they did have were survey maps, some of which I had helped update back in the day, that clearly showed the boundaries of my uncle's property, fences, outbuildings, and even an old trail gate that had collapsed a decade ago. My uncle had definitively claimed and maintained that land, and the satellite images backed it up. I scanned every relevant document and sent it to Brian. Then I paid a visit to my friend Sylvia, who ran one of the more reputable title companies in the state. She was already familiar with the mess, having heard about the HOA lady through local gossip. I asked her to prepare a formal rebuttal, a notarized ownership affidavit, and a review of title showing undisturbed possession and private use for the past 15 years. Sylvia chuckled as she handed me a thick stack of papers. "You're not just hitting back, you're setting up a kill shot." "Let's hope I don't have to pull the trigger," I said. But I want it chambered. Brian sent an official cease and desist to Riverbend Falls HOA, accompanied by the affidavit and the satellite imagery. The language was deliberately sharp. Phrases like malicious misrepresentation, attempted encroachment, and intent to defraud via servitude manipulation were sprinkled liberally throughout. I didn't stop there. I filed a complaint with the county commission flagging the HOA for false claims and unauthorized activity in sensitive land zones. My submission included GPS data, photos of the destroyed fire ring, the illegal signage, the fake gate, and statements from the sheriff's report. I also included a copy of Karen's little community letter from the HOA website, the one where she called me an aggressive newcomer interfering with shared resources. Yeah, that one really helped my case. 3 days later, my phone buzzed again. "You're gonna love this," Brian said. "Karen just filed a formal petition for easement with the commission. She's claiming the riverfront constitutes a shared access corridor historically maintained by the HOA, and get this, she attached a homemade map showing her version of the green space. It includes about 200 feet of your river frontage and lists it as Phase 3 HOA recreational buffer." I nearly crushed the phone in my hand. Phase 3? Yep, apparently this HOA thinks expansion works like an empire. I exhaled through my teeth. She's not just pushing boundaries, she's redrawing the goddamn map. "Well, the good news is she submitted it to a public body," Brian said. "So now we get to respond publicly. And believe me, we will." I felt the pressure in my chest release slightly. This wasn't just me in the woods with a camera anymore. I had a legal team. I had evidence. And I had every intention of making this war expensive, public, and humiliating. Let Karen and her little empire try to explain this to the commission. The invitation arrived in the most condescending font imaginable. Riverbend Falls HOA cordially invites you to our annual Nature Appreciation Picnic. Location, Community Green Zone, River Access Path A. Time, Saturday, 12 p.m. Guests welcome. I stared at it in disbelief. The flyer had been taped to the post at the edge of my property where the illegally posted HOA sign used to be before I tore it down. Except this time, instead of a warning, it was practically a party invite to a trespassing festival. I scanned the rest. No contact info, just a pastel drawing of a smiling sun and a hand-drawn map that led straight to my old campsite. My first instinct was to laugh. My second was to find my crowbar and staple gun. But Brian's voice echoed in the back of my mind. "Document, don't detonate." So instead, I grabbed my camera and hiked the access path early Saturday morning before anyone could show up. The fire ring hadn't been rebuilt, but the area had been cleaned up again. This time, someone had brought in fold-out tables. Bright paper streamers fluttered between two saplings. There was a pop-up canopy half collapsed in the brush. Someone had clearly tried to stake it into the ground but gave up when they realized tree roots aren't easily negotiated by middle-aged HOA volunteers with mallets. I took photos of everything. The decorations, the fresh tire tracks, even the cheap banner rolled up under a tarp that read, "Riverbend Community Family Picnic, a tradition of shared space." By noon, they started arriving. First, it was a few Subarus and Hondas bumping cautiously down the gravel road. Then a silver Lexus, probably Karen's, gliding over roots like it was made for destroying ecosystems. Within 30 minutes, at least 20 people were milling around the riverbend. Kids were already flinging pebbles into the water. Someone was setting up a Bluetooth speaker. Coolers popped open, blankets unrolled. A couple began assembling a propane grill like they were on the back patio at a country club. No one looked like they thought they were doing anything wrong. I kept my distance at first, standing just off the path near the rise. I wanted to see if anyone even noticed where they were. They didn't. Not one person asked whose land this was. Not one person hesitated to stake claim with their folding chairs and lemonade jugs. Then Karen arrived, big sunglasses, wide-brimmed sun hat, the kind of faux outdoorsy smile you see in real estate brochures next to the words elevated lifestyle. She walked around like a hostess at a brunch event, hugging neighbors, laughing just a little too loud, pointing toward the river like she was giving a damn tour. I waited until she reached the table with the snacks before stepping out of the tree line. "Afternoon," I said, just loud enough to carry over the music. Heads turned, conversations faltered. Karen froze with a half-sliced watermelon in her hands. I walked slowly into the clearing, camera in one hand, folder in the other. "Did you all bring permits?" "Because this is a private gathering on private land." Karen straightened, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Oh, Nolan, please. This is just a harmless little community event. A tradition. It's been held here for years, before you even came along." I tilted my head. Fascinating. And yet, no one seemed to mention it to the actual property owner. She laughed, high and tight. "There's no need to be hostile. It's just a picnic." "No, Karen," I said, stepping closer. "This is a strategic attempt to fabricate public use of private land. You're trying to create evidence of community access so you can push your servitude petition. This isn't a picnic. It's a goddamn exhibit for court." That made her flinch. A few people started to pack up, slowly, watching us. The tension was thick enough to slice. Karen tried to regain control. "People have every right to enjoy the river," she said, lifting her chin. "They do," I replied, "but not from here. This stretch is privately owned. The HOA has no legal access. You're all trespassing. And you're being filmed doing it." I tapped the GoPro on my chest. Her eyes narrowed. She stepped forward, lowering her voice. "You really want to make enemies in this community?" "Lady," I said, "you declared war the second you nailed a sign into my trees." She opened her mouth to reply, but I cut her off. "And by the way, I've already filed notice with the county. Any public events staged here without consent are not only invalid as evidence, they're violations." Then I turned to the crowd. "I'm not asking anyone to leave. I'm telling you, if you stay, you'll be part of an active trespassing report. Name, license plate, everything." That did it. They started packing faster. Karen fumed, mouth tight, but she knew the performance had failed. The cameras ruined the play. Without photos of smiling kids and shared watermelon slices, the picnic wouldn't be the proof of public use she wanted. I stood there until the last car crawled back up the trail. The canopy was left half collapsed. Someone forgot a tub of potato salad. Karen was the last to leave, her car kicking dust into the trees, but not before she rolled down the window and said, "This won't end well for you." I smiled, leaned down to her level. "Wrong again, Karen. It's already ending badly for you." The fake letter showed up on a Wednesday, tucked into my mailbox like it belonged there. No envelope, just folded in half and stamped with a seal that looked real. Too real. From Chatham County Land Use Commission, RE, Notice of Encroachment Dispute, Parcel 38 BER. The formatting was just right. Letterhead, bolded citations of code numbers, even a signature at the bottom that read, Deputy Director M.T. Cleaves. I'd never heard of him, but it sounded plausible. And that's what made it dangerous. According to the letter, my land had been marked as part of a pending use conflict based on unresolved access ambiguity related to previous community development initiatives. The language was bureaucratic poison, vague enough to scare most people, but pointed enough to feel threatening. It was a bluff, but a sophisticated one. I held the page in both hands and stared at it. My mind went cold, calculating. Karen was escalating. This wasn't flyers or garbage signs anymore. This was manufactured authority, weaponized paperwork, and it was damn near good enough to fool someone without a background in land policy. But unfortunately for her, I had that background. Before doing anything else, I scanned the letter and emailed it to Brian and to the actual Chatham County Land Use Commission. I also CC'd the State Attorney General's office just for flavor. Then I made a cup of coffee, opened the HOA Facebook page, and, surprise, surprise, found that the letter had already been posted in their private group. A helpful neighbor had screenshotted it and written, "Looks like the county is finally recognizing the conflict. Maybe they'll protect our river access after all." The post had nearly 70 likes and a dozen comments agreeing that Nolan needs to back off and HOA green zones are for everyone. So this wasn't just a stunt, it was a PR maneuver. She was trying to spin the fake letter into community momentum. I leaned back in my chair, adrenaline creeping into my neck. I didn't want to believe Karen was dumb enough to forge an official document. But the deeper I looked, the more confident I became. The signature was fake. The commission had no Deputy Director Cleaves, and the parcel ID number listed was outdated, replaced in the registry 5 years ago. By the time Brian called back, I was already composing a police report. "This is felony territory," he said immediately. "Forgery of government documents. Fraudulent representation of official communication. This is not some HOA squabble. This is criminal." "I know," I said. "You want to file or should I?" "Already in motion," he replied. "But Nolan, if she distributed this physically, not just online, we might be dealing with mail fraud too. That could pull in the feds." I let that hang in the air for a moment. Then I smiled, a slow, bitter thing. "You want a cherry on top?" I said. The HOA post went up before the letter landed in my mailbox. Brian laughed once, dry and sharp. "Oh, she's toast." I spent the rest of the afternoon compiling evidence. Photos of the letter, screenshots of the HOA post, metadata timestamps, even a video recording of me opening the mailbox and unfolding the document, which I filmed on instinct the moment I saw the logo through the slot. I uploaded everything to a shared folder titled HOA Document Fraud, Primary Evidence. The next morning, 2 uniformed officers came to take my statement. I handed over the original letter in a sealed evidence envelope. The younger one, Officer Miller, looked at it and whistled. "This looks good," he said. "Too good," I replied. "And entirely fake." By the time they left, I felt that rare kind of quiet that comes when you know the other side just stepped in something they can't scrape off. Karen hadn't just bent the law this time. She'd broken it with a smile. I heard later from a contact at the county that the commission was furious. Apparently, someone had tried to call their office pretending to be an assistant to confirm the status of the encroachment case. The caller left no name, no callback number, but it was enough to trigger an internal security memo. Brian pushed for a formal investigation, and within 48 hours, a detective had been assigned to the case. They wanted interviews, access to HOA records, even a search of the admin's email history. Karen, whether she knew it or not, had opened the front door to a full-blown fraud probe. The best part? She didn't even know it yet. She was too busy collecting digital backpats in her little echo chamber, too proud of her masterstroke to realize she'd stepped off the curb and straight into traffic. I didn't celebrate. I documented, because this wasn't the end of her tricks. Not yet. People like Karen don't panic until the knock comes at their door. And it was coming. It wasn't the detective that tipped me off. It was the smell. A faint metallic stink near the base of the old cedar outcrop where my uncle's trail used to run. I was walking the eastern edge of the property, checking for new surprises from River Bend Falls, when I caught the whiff. Not wildlife, not decay. Something artificial. Something industrial. I followed it uphill past where the underbrush thickened and the tree line dipped toward the river. And that's when I saw it. A pipe. A dull PVC segment, just barely exposed, running underground and curving down slope like a vein. It looked like it had been hastily buried, but erosion, or maybe just carelessness, had uncovered part of it. It wasn't marked, wasn't insulated, and it definitely wasn't mine. I crouched, pulled out my phone, started filming. The pipe ran across my land. I followed it for maybe 50 yards before it disappeared into the brush, but I had a pretty good idea where it led. Toward the HOA. Toward River Bend Falls. By the time I got back to the truck, I'd mapped the route, dropped GPS pins, and forwarded everything to Brian. He called back 5 minutes later. "That's the utility trench," he said. They installed one back in '09 to run a supplemental water main to the Phase 1 homes. It wasn't approved. It was quietly grandfathered after the fact when no one complained. No one complained because it didn't cross private land back then. I growled. Looks like they extended it. Quietly. Maybe they thought the new section still ran along the HOA-owned forest strip. But guess what? It curves. And now it crosses directly into my property. I finished. Bingo. We requested the original blueprints and found something even juicier. The extension had never been permitted. No record of the trench addition. No environmental inspection. No authorization to run municipal-grade infrastructure across undeveloped private land. That's when everything clicked. Karen wasn't just power tripping, she was covering tracks. That green zone she kept referencing, the one she wanted annexed under the guise of shared access and environmental stewardship, It was never about community hiking trails. It was a buffer, a smokescreen to hide illegal infrastructure snaking through land they didn't own. It explained the servitude push, the fake letters, the trespassing picnic. All of it. Karen knew damn well that if I dug too deep, literally or legally, I'd find the pipe. And I just had. The next few days were a blur of reports, calls, and sleepless planning. Brian filed a cease and desist for unauthorized utility encroachment. We documented the trench's exact trajectory with a land surveyor. I hired a drone pilot to shoot overhead video. We caught where the pipe fed back into a buried connection box just inside HOA territory, hidden behind a decorative shrub line near the tennis courts. The drone footage was gold. Karen, meanwhile, went quiet. Too quiet. The Facebook group was dormant. No new flyers, no angry emails, no clumsy community initiatives. She'd either gone to ground or to her lawyers. I figured it was the latter when Brian received an anonymous tip from someone in the zoning office. A folder had been submitted weeks ago by Riverbend Falls, marked confidential. Inside, a map showing a revised community boundary that just happened to stretch over 200 feet into my property, cutting diagonally across the area where the pipe ran. It was a backdated annexation attempt, filed with altered signature logs and a handful of dead names, former residents, some of whom had sold and left the area years ago. Fraud, plain and simple. But here's the kicker. They'd done it before. Brian dug into the archives and found a similar maneuver in 2015. Back then, Karen had tried to absorb 2 vacant parcels that bordered HOA property by faking resident petitions and claiming unified community interest. One of those owners was an elderly woman with dementia. Another didn't speak English and signed paperwork he didn't understand. It hadn't gone to court because the neighbors never realized what happened. But this time, she'd picked the wrong damn landowner. We prepped the filings for court: civil suit for property interference, environmental negligence, utility trespass, fraudulent documents, and defamation. Oh, and for good measure, we added a separate personal claim against Karen Joel for deliberate misconduct and abuse of office. I stood at the edge of my land that evening, just past where the cedar trees cast long shadows on the riverbank, and imagined the headlines. HOA president faces fraud. Probe after unauthorized infrastructure that found on private land. Not bad. But I had something better in mind, because by the time this reached the judge, she wasn't going to be Karen Joel, concerned community leader. She was going to be Karen Joel, defendant number 1. Court days feel like they should start with a thunderclap, or at least dramatic music. But instead, mine began with lukewarm coffee in a too-bright hallway, surrounded by uncomfortable chairs, and that strange, persistent buzz of whispered anxiety. Brian was calm. That unnerving kind of calm lawyers develop after chewing through 100 depositions and watching people like Karen self-destruct under oath. We'd filed a multi-claim civil suit. Property interference, infrastructure trespass, malicious misrepresentation, defamation, and unauthorized environmental impact. But the real weight came from the criminal referral that had followed our report: forgery of municipal documents, illegal annexation attempts, and unpermitted utility installations. Karen showed up late, hair tightly pulled back, flanked by 2 lawyers in expensive suits who looked like they'd been briefed by a desperate PR team. She wouldn't look at me, which was fine. I didn't need her eyes. I had her pipe, her flyers, her fake maps, and her damn picnic flyers. The opening hearing wasn't long. The judge, a sharp woman in her early 60s with the patience of a coiled snake, immediately recognized the stakes. She acknowledged the criminal investigation was ongoing and scheduled an expedited civil process, citing the potential for long-term property damage and misuse of public trust. Then came the motion hearing a week later. That's when it really unraveled. We submitted the drone footage of the trench and buried pipe. The county's engineering department confirmed it hadn't been filed for inspection. The signature log Karen had submitted with the annexation attempt? Forensic analysis showed at least 6 signatures were forged, including a man who died in 2019. When confronted, Karen's legal team tried the plausible deniability route: community confusion, volunteer-led oversight, and historical boundary misunderstandings. The judge shut it down hard. "Ms. Joel," she said coldly, "you are not on trial for being disorganized. You are being accused of falsifying government records to illegally expand jurisdiction over land you do not own. That is not a clerical error. That is strategic fraud. Then she turned to our side. "Mr. Savage, your documentation is extensive and consistent. The court acknowledges your sole legal ownership of Parcel 38BR, including riverfront access, and finds no lawful basis for the HOA's actions. We weren't done yet." Brian requested immediate injunctive relief, forced dismantling of the illegal gate, removal of all signage, and excavation of the utility pipe under county supervision. The judge agreed. Then came the money. Brian outlined the damages: environmental restoration costs, legal fees, boundary surveys, reputational harm, and disruption of use. But the kicker came when he cited the HOA's misuse of member funds to carry out their defensive campaign against me, including printing flyers, hiring their security officer, and purchasing materials for the gate. And then came the number: $485,000. Karen turned pale. Her lawyer almost choked. The judge didn't blink. She ordered the HOA to pay full restitution, citing systemic abuse of power, public deception, and illegal use of community resources to target an uninvolved private citizen. Karen was named personally liable for $120,000 of that amount, pending the criminal investigation. As we stepped outside the courthouse, I could finally breathe. Reporters hovered nearby. Word had gotten out. Some of the Riverbend Falls residents were already grumbling in the background. I caught one of them saying, "She used our dues to build a water line under someone else's property." "Yeah, pal, she did." Karen didn't look at me when she left. Her head was down, heels clicking furiously against the concrete like she could outwalk shame. But I looked at her, not with triumph, not with smugness, just with that same calm I'd seen in Brian, like the moment after the avalanche starts, when all you have to do is step aside and let gravity do the work. I thought about my uncle, about the will, about that line: "Keep the land honest." I had. And now the court had too. It took nearly 3 months for the machines to arrive. 2 backhoes, a county supervisor's truck, and a pair of orange vested inspectors rolled down the gravel path early on a crisp October morning. Engines humming like Judgment Day had finally decided to get to work. I met them at the gate, the same one Karen's officer had once stood behind like a Walmart security guard with a power complex. Except now, he was gone. So was the gate. So were the signs, the gravel bed, and the smug little HOA seal that used to glare from every laminated warning. The county contractors were here to do the one thing Karen probably feared most: undo it all. They dug up the illegal pipe section by section, sealed it, capped the line near the HOA border, and loaded the segments into flatbeds like trophies. One inspector documented the soil damage and ordered limited restoration. "Might take a few seasons," he said, "but it'll recover." I smiled and nodded. Nature's good like that. You give her room, and she heals. By winter, the money hit my account. $485,000 total, cleared and verified. I used part of it to pay off the last of our mortgage, part to rebuild the riverfront trail in honor of my uncle, and the rest to fund a small off-grid homestead right at the curve of the river where the fire ring once stood. I built it with my own hands. Solar power, a composting toilet, a small workshop, and a screened porch that catches the sunrise like it's owed rent. It's not flashy. It's not modern. But it's honest. The same way the land always was. Karen didn't go to jail, but she came close. The criminal case ended with a plea deal: forgery of public records, fraudulent misrepresentation, and attempted land annexation. She got a 10-year ban from holding any HOA office, 2 years probation, a formal apology published in the local paper, and a mandatory ethics course. From what I heard, she moved out of Riverbend Falls a few months later, sold her house in silence. The buyer was a retired teacher who put up a handmade sign in her yard that read, "Community starts with respect, not control." Amen to that. As for the HOA, the fallout was messy. Residents were furious. Several board members resigned. The budget was gutted by the lawsuit, and the next president voted to dissolve the Green Zone Initiative entirely. The picnic area was abandoned. The Facebook group turned into a ghost town. For once, silence wasn't suspicious. It was peaceful. People still drive by sometimes. They see the little cabin near the river, the small garden, the carved wooden sign by the trailhead that says, "If it's not your land, don't try to own it. If it's not your fire, don't try to put it out." Some knock. Friends, locals, even a few former HOA members who sheepishly admit they didn't know the full story. I tell them they're welcome to walk, to fish, to sit by the river with permission. Because land doesn't make a man righteous, but how he defends it, that says everything. So I keep the fire pit lit. I keep the trail clean. I keep the memory of a quiet old man who left me something bigger than property. He left me purpose. And every morning, when I watch the mist roll over the river bend, I know one thing for damn sure. Karen never saw this coming.